Shut up.
Said a word.
Oh, I bet that's all.
Hello, my name is Patrick Smith, and today I will critique the infamous speech of General Douglas MacArthur that General Douglas MacArthur delivered to Congress. He started his speech with, I quote, "I stand on this rostrum with a sense of deep humility and great pride. Humility in the weight of those architects of our country, of our history who have stood here before me. Pride in the reflection that this home of legislative debate represents the human liberty in the purest form yet devised," unquote. This powerful visual, to me, was a good and effective hook for this speech. This speech was during the Korean War, and yet only 8 days after President Truman had fired General Douglas MacArthur, who was in charge of all Allied forces fighting in the Korean War at that time. This occurred on the 19th of April at the request of the Democratic Congress. General Douglas MacArthur made this speech in person to the House and the Senate and by radio to the entire American public. He did this to persuade America to act against communism in China. The speaker had a reputation that was well trusted. He required no introduction to the audience, as he was synonymous with the word victory, and he was revered by most Americans for his wartime accomplishments and his 52 years of military service. The dynamics of the Korean War had just shifted to include with the inclusion of the Chinese troops on the northern Korean borders. And the president did not agree with General MacArthur's battle plans that included attacking China to deter the spread of communism. But after the general's public statements, which contradicted the administration's policies, the president relieved the general of his command of the war, which was 8 days prior to this speech. The main message of his speech was to act now and to stop communism from spreading from China through Europe and into the rest of the world. His minor messages were to explain the Asian transformation over the last 50 years of how they had developed into a communistic state, why it was wise to use the people of Formosa to help fight in the war and save them from communist oppression as well, that it is imperative that we act now to stop the rise of communism, and finally, this would be his final action as a soldier as he is retiring from the military. This speech was a formal speech. Everything about this speech was formal, from the location to the audience to the language and the message that had a sense of urgency to it. He used the problem call solution pattern of organization for his speech. Communism is the problem. China is the cause, and his tactical plan was his solution. As he described and went through the entire speech, he laid his speech out in that pattern. I believe that the message he gave was well communicated, but not completely welcomed or received by everyone. The argument he provided was one-sided and did not show any contrasting views as to a second course of action. The speaker had little emotion when he spoke, but was sincere about the importance and severity of the consequences. And that was typical of that era of speaking. The speaker spoke in a single voice, a monotone level. There were slight changes to emphasize empathy and importance. He began with a welcoming voice to maintain calm and open-mindedness. He then progressed to a voice of confidence and knowledge to teach and convince the audience of his message. Lastly, he moved to a calm ending and a memorable final phrase. He spoke with appropriate diction of the time, using very descriptive phrases to deliver his messages. He stayed behind the rostrum, but maintained eye contact with the audience. A lesson from his speech is proper word phrasing and appropriate delivery can be extremely moving. In conclusion, the most memorable part of the speech was the ending, and that's what everybody generally remembers about his speech. The speaker's transition from delivering his persuasive message to praising the current fighting forces at war in Korea and bidding farewell to his career with his memorable quote of the famous West Point barracks ballad, quote, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away," unquote. I do like this speech. The conclusion was concise and memorable, but it did not meet the objective. It was a persuasive speech, but it failed because history has shown that his recommendations were not implemented during the Korean War.